This video will focus on the second part of Chapter 7 on movies, which looks at the film industry as well as how it makes its money. Now, there are three main ways that Hollywood style continues to be pervasive in movies. You may notice that a lot of movies are very similar, and this is because the Hollywood style focuses on three main elements. The first is narrative. Narrative is the structure of the story. It's the plot lines. It's what you are telling people happens within the movie. There are certain character types, like the villain or the hero. There's usually a beginning, middle, and end within a story as well. And when you don't provide a good resolution to a story, it can often leave audiences upset. In narrative structures, plots move forward by having the main characters experience and then resolve conflict. And so this is really the underlying structure of almost all movies within Hollywood. And this started once the directors and the movie makers were trying to move away from the trade and were moving further into Hollywood, California as a production center. And this Hollywood style remains in the way that we make movies today. And so, again, narrative structures are one of the three elements that continue to be pervasive in movies that are produced in Hollywood. Now, the second aspect of Hollywood style is genre. A genre is a type or characterization of a certain form of film. So there are many different types of genres. In early Hollywood cinema, a popular genre, for instance, was westerns. We don't have a lot of westerns today, but they were one of the most notable type of genre. We also have romantic movies like The Notebook. We have horror movies like Poltergeist, sci-fi like Lord of the Rings, superhero movies like Black Panther, and then of course we have musicals like La La Land or The Greatest Showman. And these were unusual types of genres because they didn't follow the typical film idea of recreating real life. And they really peaked in the 1940s and 50s and have seen a recent return with movies like The Greatest Showman and La La Land. But you can see how genres work to help define a certain movie and what the audience should be expecting. For instance, if I tried to market Poltergeist as a romance of a family who's just moving into this new home, and then you came and saw Poltergeist, which is about how this house was built on a graveyard and it's haunted, you might be a little upset by how that genre was promoted for the movie. And so genres really allow easier promotion for a film because it fits within a pre-existing category. Now, of course, there are those movies that jump genres, such as Deadpool, which combines a comedy movie with a superhero movie. And those can be successful, but they are harder to make. Now, you may notice that a lot of Hollywood movies also rely on continued storylines. And so these are called series. So we have the Harry Potter series, which is a series of 8 films, all about the same characters involving different plot lines for each movie, but they all have very similar storylines. Same for Final Destination, the millions of Fast and Furious movies that there are, James Bond movies, Tyler Perry's Medea, and even Star Wars. So, series are important to Hollywood style because they are easy to promote, they are easy to produce. Once you're a Harry Potter fan, you're gonna want to continue seeing the rest of the movies. And if you've spent enough times watching movies, I don't know, 1 through 3, you are more likely to keep going back for the other movies in the series because you want to know what happens to these characters. So this is an easy way that Hollywood makes money is through the series that they produce. Another way that Hollywood kind of relies on pre-existing categories of movies is by taking things that were previously successful and remaking them or updating them for future audiences. Up top, you can see A Star is Born, and it has had many different adaptations, including its latest one with Lady Gaga. Now, Disney has been remaking their own classic films into live action movies with Maleficent or Sleeping Beauty, Beauty and the Beast, Jungle Book, or even Mulan, which premiered recently. And so these are, again, easy ways for production companies to make money because they're using existing classics and updating them or remaking them for people that they know will want to watch them. Now, the third aspect of Hollywood style is the authors. And of course, the authors of movies are really the directors. Many directors in Hollywood are as popular as actors are, and they tend to have the same star power as those actors do, even if they've never appeared as an actor themselves. Alfred Hitchcock is one of the most well known directors on the bottom left there, and he had early fame power as a Hollywood director, even before film became a huge medium as it is now. The problem with a lot of Hollywood directors is that there is a lack of diverse voices. In fact, a recent study found that women were hired for only 3.4 of major Hollywood films as directors. And of course, minority directors, people of color, are also extremely underrepresented in Hollywood. What does that mean? Well, when your authors are less diverse, that means your stories are also not representative of the cultures that they are meant to be reflecting. And so, this is a continued discussion within Hollywood to try to get more diverse voices. And the interesting thing is, when women and minorities direct movies, they tend to be very widely accepted. And so, it's an interesting dynamic that these films are actually very popular, they make a lot of money, and yet they are still being kept out of many Hollywood studios. For instance, Catherine Bigelow became the first and so far only woman to win an Oscar for Best Director for her directing of the movie The Hurt Locker. And she is right here. Now, of course, Nora Ephron, pictured above here, produced many of the famous rom coms that we know. And Nora Ephron has really become a household name in terms of directors, but she's not as widely respected because she's in the genre of romantic comedies as opposed to like a Steven Spielberg who tends to produce these huge blockbusters, or Martin Scorsese, who tends to produce big action movies. Now, in terms of people of color, Jordan Peele became the first Black person to win an Oscar for original screenplay for his movie Get Out. So you can see the huge success that this movie has had, as well as Peele's success as a screenplay writer. Black Panther, which was directed by Ryan Coogler, became the first Black director of a Marvel superhero movie, and it was one of the most widely sold and widely accepted and loved superhero movies. And in fact, it's one of my favorites as well. Now, Sofia Coppola became the first American woman ever nominated for Best Director back in 2003. So you can see it took women a very long time to be recognized by the Academy for directing. Of course, her father, Frank Coppola, was also very famous within Hollywood. Now, Patty Jenkins, who directed the original Wonder Woman movie with Gal Gadot, she was the first female director of a major superhero movie as well. And now she is directing, writing, and producing Wonder Woman 1984, which is set to be released later this year. Ava DuVernay was the first Black woman to direct a film with an over $100 million budget for A Wrinkle in Time, which of course featured Oprah Winfrey, who also helped with the movie's production. So we do have some minority voices that are being heard in Hollywood, but more is certainly needed for our movies to become more diverse and better representative of our nation. But what happens when you step out of Hollywood, those major studio houses? Well, American films tend to capture 90% of the global market, meaning that America is a huge producer of film even outside of the United States. in terms of what Americans watch for foreign films, we actually see less than 2% of foreign films in the United States. So we don't really get a large import of films, but we do export a lot of movies to other cultures. Now, Bollywood in India is actually the largest film industry in the world. They produce almost 2,000 movies a year, while the United States produces around 700 a year. Outside of major motion pictures, there are other different types of films that can be very popular. Documentaries are one that have been very popular that they usually tackle more controversial issues. Some of the most well known documentaries are from producer Michael Moore, such as Bowling for Columbine, Fahrenheit 9/11, and Sicko. Although there have been wonderful documentaries produced, they tend not to get the national interest that films like this one, like these, have. Indies are independent films that are often made on a very small budget and better technology from cell phones or inexpensive cameras, as well as producers or subscribing services like Netflix, have really kept this genre alive. And in fact, the Sundance Film Festival, which takes place every January in Park City, Utah, is one of the major promoters of indie films and allowing those independent producers to have their films seen. Some of the most well-known indie films are that have happened recently are Eighth Grade, The Blair Witch Project, Napoleon Dynamite, Get Out, Call Me by Your Name, Whiplash, The Kids Are All Right, 500 Days of Summer, Black Swan, The Wrestler, My Big Fat Greek Wedding, The King's Speech, and Pulp Fiction. But the most successful indie film ever produced was The Passion of the Christ, which made over $600 million for this independent filmmaker. So you can see that some of these productions are very popular. They make a lot of money, but it's very rare for indie films to see the commercial success that large productions do. Now, in terms of making money from the movie industry, it costs a lot of money to make a movie. And so it's a very risky business, just like television. In the last decade, the average movie cost $103 million to make, which includes about $37 million for domestic marketing. For Batman versus Superman from the DC world, it had a $250 million budget and then an additional $150 million for marketing. And Avengers Endgame's total budget was $535 million, making it one of the most expensive superhero movies to produce. And unfortunately, the risk often doesn't pay off for movie producers. 80 to 90% of all movies released fail to make any money. Now, studios make money from six different sources. The first is box office sales, and studios get about 40% of their sales from the box office. 60% of those sales go to the movie theaters themselves. The Motion Picture Academy and for audiences says that audiences 12 to 17 years old saw an average of 4.9 movies, while 18 to 24-year-olds saw an average of 4.7 movies a year, and the 25 to 39-year-olds saw an average of only 4.2 movies in 2019. Of course, we expect those numbers to be much lower in 2020 due to the coronavirus. Now, the average ticket price for 2019 was $9.16, but obviously it's much more expensive in urban areas where tickets in Birmingham tend to average about $10 to $15. Now, home video market is a second way that studios make money. And it's, in fact, the place where they make more total revenue than domestic box office sales. And so this includes video on demand, Blu ray or DVD, and streaming of their movies. So this is one of the largest revenue sources for these studios. Premium cable and eventually basic cable, who showed these movies like HBO, Stars, and then, of course, regular cable once it's been a while. These also produce money for the studios. Foreign markets can make large revenue sources for studios. And Netflix is really changing that game because it is allowing more international audiences to see content than ever before. And so, it doesn't necessarily mean that the studio is making more money because they're having to license the subscription rights to Netflix, but ultimately, foreign markets can make a big difference in whether a movie is seen as successful or not. Money from independent movies that they back is another source of revenue for studios. And then licensing and product placement. Licensing being like selling products from that movie, such as costumes from the Marvel movies, and product placement, we'll talk about here in a second. So, product placement is when a company pays for their product to appear within your film. Here are some of the most well-known product placements that have happened recently. I think E.T. eating the Reese's Pieces is one of the most infamous, not only because it was such a great movie and made so much money for Hershey's, but also because M&M really missed out on a great marketing opportunity. Steven Spielberg originally wanted E.T. to eat M&Ms in the movie, but Mars said that they wouldn't allow it. So Hershey's said Reese's Pieces could be used, and they agreed to spend $1 million on ads to promote the film. And after E.T. was released, their sales soared, and so M&M really missed out on that. Heineken had a lot of product placements within the recent James Bond movie Skyfall, and their product placement cost covered a third of Skyfall's overall movie budget. So you can see that this can be a large source of revenue for the studios as well. Now, in terms of the best earners in domestic box office sales, the most successful movie was Star Wars Force Awakens, and it had 936 million in terms of lifetime gross since 2015. Avengers Endgame is the second highest earner, with Avatar rounding out the top three. But in terms of having the highest domestic opening weekend of all time, Avengers Endgame, I should say, is still the number one earner for opening weekend at 357 million in its first weekend. In terms of those movies that have made the most globally, it's Avengers Endgame at 2.7 billion, and then Avatar, followed by the 1997 movie Titanic. Now, the movie industry is facing unprecedented issues. And one of the biggest challenges for the movie industry, of course, is the internet and the digital space. In 2012, more people access movies via online media than physical copies, which brings in less money for the studio. In addition, digital video preservation techniques have been difficult. While a film can last over 100 years, digital formats are often lost when people forget to keep them or to store them properly, archive them properly. And so the equipment becomes obsolete as digital formats kind of drain out. So what we were using for DVDs, if you don't have a DVD player, that format is now obsolete. And if that's the only place that has been archived or preserved, that movie or film could be lost forever. Now, digital video allows for blockbusters to be made on shoestring budgets as well, which really displaces the larger movie industry. It allows for a lot of smaller minority voices to be heard because you don't need these huge budgets. But it hurts the industry overall because you're not spending as much money to make a big production. Now, Paranormal Activity was made for about $15,000, but earned $200 million worldwide. Similarly, there have been many films recently that were shot exclusively on iPhone and screened at major film festivals like Sundance. And some people are saying that is the wave of the future. Now, pirating, while improving in recent years, is still a major problem. In 2017, Wonder Woman was the most pirated film, and studios estimate their losses in the millions in terms of people who are watching movies but not paying for them. And also, we are still learning what the outcome is going to be of the COVID pandemic on Hollywood. And I have uploaded a really interesting article about the impact on Hollywood and the film industry for you to read in Canvas. There will be a question or two on your exam from this article. So I encourage you to go read it. So that wraps up our videos on mass communication, history, and industry on film. And now that we have finished our movies section, we are ready for exam 3. So before you start preparing for exam 3, make sure you finish your discussion post of the impact on streaming on the movie industry. And then you can begin preparing for exam 3 by using the worksheet that I've attached into Canvas, as well as asking any questions you may have for the discussion post. As always, if you have any questions or you need me for anything, don't hesitate to reach out.